March 12, 1964, 2:13 a.m. Bumpy Johnson's phone rang. He'd been asleep for exactly 47 minutes. At 60 years old, sleep didn't come easy anymore. 11 years in Alcatraz had trained his body to wake at the slightest sound. So when the phone rang in the darkness of his Harlem apartment, Bumpy was alert before the second ring. He picked up. Didn't say hello, just waited. "Mr. Johnson." The voice was unmistakable, precise, controlled, but underneath, Bumpy heard something he'd never heard in that voice before. Fear. "This is Malcolm. Malcolm X. I need your help." Bumpy sat up, turned on the lamp. "It's 2 in the morning." "I know. I'm sorry, but this can't wait, and it can't be discussed over the phone during business hours. Too many people listening." "Where are you?" "Pay phone on 116th. I can be at your place in 5 minutes." Bumpy thought about it. Malcolm X calling him at 2 a.m. asking for help. The man who preached against crime, against the street life, against everything Bumpy represented. Something big had to be happening. Something desperate. "Come to Small's Paradise. Back entrance. 20 minutes." What happened in the next hour would test every principle Bumpy Johnson had built his life on. It would force him to choose between profit and community, between business relationships and moral obligation. And it would prove something that most people didn't understand about power in Harlem. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can protect isn't money or territory. It's faith. To understand why Malcolm X called Bumpy Johnson that night, you need to understand what was happening to Malcolm in March 1964. 3 weeks earlier, Malcolm had done the unthinkable. He'd left the Nation of Islam, the organization that had saved him in prison, the movement that had made him famous, the family he'd served for 12 years. He left because he discovered that Elijah Muhammad, the man he'd called his spiritual father, had been having affairs with multiple young women in the organization. Some barely 18, some getting pregnant. All of it covered up by the leadership. When Malcolm tried to address it quietly, privately, they silenced him, suspended him, made him persona non grata. So Malcolm left, announced it publicly, started his own organization, Muslim Mosque Incorporated, declared that he was still Muslim, still committed to black liberation, but no longer under the Nation of Islam's authority. The response was immediate and brutal. Death threats. Daily, dozens of them. Phone calls to his home in Queens at all hours. Letters describing exactly how they'd kill him. Cars following him everywhere he went. And the threats weren't just against Malcolm. They threatened his wife Betty, his 4 daughters. The youngest was just a few months old. But Malcolm could handle threats against himself. He'd been threatened before. What he couldn't handle was what he'd learned 2 days ago from a source inside the nation. They weren't planning to kill him right away. They were planning something worse. They were going to erase his legacy, destroy the places where people could remember him, study his teachings, continue his work. They were going to firebomb the mosques in Harlem where Malcolm had preached for years. Muslim Mosque No. 7 on Lenox Avenue, the storefront where Malcolm had held study groups, the community center where he'd taught young people about black history and self-respect. All of it. Burn it to the ground. Make it so that when they finally killed Malcolm, there'd be nothing left of what he'd built. And Malcolm knew he couldn't stop it. He had no muscle, no enforcers. His organization was 3 weeks old. Most of his followers were intellectuals, students, people committed to his message, but not equipped to fight a street war with Nation of Islam enforcers who'd spent years learning how to intimidate and eliminate threats. So Malcolm made a choice that went against everything he'd ever preached publicly. He called the one man in Harlem who had the power to stop it, Bumpy Johnson. 2:33 a.m. Bumpy was sitting at his usual table in Small's Paradise. The club was closed, just him and the night security guard, who knew when to make himself scarce. Bumpy had a pot of coffee on the table. 2 cups. Malcolm walked in through the back entrance. He was wearing a simple suit, no bow tie tonight. He looked exhausted. Thinner than the last time Bumpy had seen him on television. The weight of the last few weeks showing in his face. Bumpy gestured to the chair across from him. Malcolm sat. "Coffee? Thank you." Malcolm's hand shook slightly as he picked up the cup. He noticed Bumpy noticing. "I haven't slept in 3 days. Every time I close my eyes, I think I hear someone breaking into my house." "The threats are real?" "Very real. But I'm not here about threats against me." Malcolm set down the cup. "I'm here about the mosques." Bumpy listened as Malcolm explained what he'd learned. The plan to firebomb Muslim Mosque number 7 and 2 other locations. The timeline, sometime in the next 2 weeks. The goal, erase Malcolm's legacy in Harlem before killing him. When Malcolm finished, Bumpy was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something Malcolm wasn't expecting. "You know what you're asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to protect the mosques." "You're asking me to go against people I do business with. Some of those Nation of Islam enforcers, they work in my organization. They run numbers. They provide security. We have an understanding. You're asking me to break that understanding." Malcolm looked Bumpy in the eye. "I know. You spent years preaching against men like me, against the numbers racket, against street crime, against everything I represent. You told people I was part of the problem, part of the system keeping black people down. You weren't wrong about some of that. And now you're sitting at my table asking for help." "I know, and I understand if you say no. I understand if you think I'm a hypocrite for coming here. But those mosques, Mr. Johnson, they're not about me. They're about the community. Kids pray there. Families worship there. Old women who've never hurt anyone come there to find one peace. If those buildings burn, it's not me they're hurting. It's Harlem." Bumpy poured himself more coffee. "You know my rule. I don't do politics. I don't do religion. Business only. The moment you start mixing business with causes, you lose focus. You make emotional decisions. Emotional decisions get you killed. Then consider this business. Those mosques bring people to Harlem. They bring commerce. They bring stability. They give young men something to believe in besides the streets. You want Harlem strong? Those institutions make Harlem strong." Bumpy almost smiled. "You're smarter than people give you credit for. I learned from watching you." "What?" Malcolm leaned forward. "You think I didn't study how you operated? You think I didn't pay attention to how you kept the Italian families out of Harlem? How you maintained control without constant violence? How you built a system that protected this neighborhood? I disagreed with your methods. I still do. But I respected the outcome. Harlem stayed black-owned because of you. That mattered." Bumpy studied Malcolm's face. The man was genuine. Desperate, yes, but genuine. And he was right about one thing. Those mosques did matter to Harlem. They provided something Bumpy's organization never could: hope, direction, spiritual strength. "Who's planning the attacks?" Bumpy asked. Malcolm pulled out a folded piece of paper. 3 names. Bumpy recognized 2 of them. One ran a numbers bank on 135th Street. Another provided muscle for collection operations. Both had connections to the Nation of Islam. Both were part of the ecosystem Bumpy had built. "If I stop this, I lose money. I lose relationships. I create problems in my organization." "I know, and I can't protect you. You understand that? I can save the mosques, but you, Malcolm, you're a marked man. Eventually, they're going to get to you. And when they do, there's nothing I can do about it. You're too visible, too public. You operate in Manhattan, Queens, everywhere. I can't put guards on you everywhere you go. I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm asking you to protect the mosques. That's all." Bumpy made his decision. He stood up. "Give me 48 hours." Over the next 2 days, Bumpy Johnson sent a message through Harlem's invisible network. Not through official channels, not through meetings or announcements, through the people who actually ran the streets. Barbers, bartenders, numbers runners, security guards, the people who saw and heard everything. The message was simple. Muslim Mosque number 7 is protected. The study center on 125th is protected. The community center is protected. Anyone who moves against those buildings answers to me personally. Personally. That word carried weight. Bumpy didn't use it often. When he did, it meant he was taking the matter as an insult to himself. It meant there would be consequences, direct consequences. The two enforcers planning the firebombing got the message. They came to see Bumpy, wanted to explain. It wasn't personal, it was orders from the nation. Malcolm was a traitor. The mosques represented his rebellion. They had to be destroyed. Bumpy listened to all of it. Then he said something that became legendary in Harlem. "I don't care about your organization's politics. I don't care about Malcolm X's problems with Elijah Muhammad. What I care about is those buildings standing in my neighborhood, providing value to my community. They burn, I lose. You make me lose. You lose everything." The enforcers left. One of them, the one who ran the numbers bank, was smart. He dropped the plan immediately. Told his Nation of Islam contacts the risk wasn't worth it. Found other ways to show his loyalty. The other one, the muscle guy, wasn't as smart. He thought Bumpy was bluffing, thought Nation of Islam backing would protect him. He started gathering materials for the firebombing anyway. Gasoline, bottles, rags. He never got to use them. March 15th, 1964. 3 days after Malcolm's meeting with Bumpy, the enforcer disappeared. Not killed. Disappeared. He showed up in Chicago 2 weeks later with a new name and a construction job. Word came back through channels. He'd been given a choice. Leave New York permanently, or have his entire operation dismantled, his connections burned, his future in Harlem destroyed. He chose Chicago. The mosques stayed untouched. Muslim Mosque No. 7 continued operating. The study center on 125th Street kept its doors open. Kids kept coming for after-school programs. Families kept coming for Friday prayers. Malcolm never knew about the enforcer who'd been sent to Chicago. Bumpy didn't tell him. That wasn't how this worked. You didn't explain how you kept people safe. You just kept them safe. But Malcolm knew the mosques were protected, and he knew why. One night in April, about a month after their meeting, Malcolm saw Bumpy on the street outside Small's Paradise. Malcolm crossed the street, approached him. "Mr. Johnson." "Malcolm, I wanted to thank you for the mosques. They're still standing. Nothing to thank me for. Good for business. Like I said." Malcolm smiled. He knew better. "If you ever need anything, ever, you call me." "I don't need anything from you, Malcolm. You just keep teaching those kids. Keep giving them something to believe in. Harlem needs that more than it needs anything I provide." That was the last conversation they had. Because 11 months later, on February 21st, 1965, Malcolm X was assassinated. Not in Harlem, in Manhattan, the Audubon Ballroom, 3 men with shotguns and pistols. Malcolm was speaking to an audience of 400 people about the Organization of Afro-American Unity when they rushed the stage. It happened outside Bumpy's territory, outside his control, outside anywhere he could have stopped it. When Bumpy got the news, he was at Wells' restaurant having lunch. Someone came in, whispered to him. Bumpy set down his fork, sat there for 5 minutes without moving. Then he got up, left the restaurant, and went home. He didn't come out for 2 days. The funeral was February 27th, 1965. Faith Temple Church of God in Christ. Thousands of people. Lines around the block. Everyone who'd ever been touched by Malcolm's message trying to pay respects. Bumpy Johnson showed up. Didn't announce himself. Didn't try to sit up front. Stood in the back. Wore a simple black suit. No fedora today. He stood there through the entire service. Through the speeches. Through the tears. Through Betty Shabazz's grief that filled that church like a physical presence. And when the Vewaza, they asked people to bow their heads in prayer. Bumpy Johnson, the man who'd never been seen praying in public, who'd made his life in the streets rather than the church, bowed his head and prayed. People noticed. Community leaders, ministers, people who'd known Bumpy for decades, they'd never seen him pray. Never seen him show that kind of public reverence. After the service, someone asked him about it. Why he came, why he prayed. Bumpy's answer was simple. He was Harlem. We protect our own. The mosques Malcolm had worried about stayed open for decades. Muslim Mosque number 7 is still there today, still serving the community, still teaching young people about faith and dignity and self-respect. The building stands because of a conversation at 2 a.m. in an empty nightclub between two men who disagreed about almost everything except one thing. Harlem mattered. The story of Bumpy and Malcolm isn't usually told. It doesn't fit the narrative people want. Malcolm the revolutionary, Bumpy the gangster. Two men on opposite sides of morality. But life isn't that simple. Power isn't that simple. Harlem wasn't that simple. Sometimes the man who runs the numbers racket and the man who preaches liberation end up on the same side. Sometimes protection comes from unexpected places. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is make sure the places where people find hope stay standing. Bumpy Johnson couldn't save Malcolm X. Nobody could. Malcolm knew he was going to die. He'd said it publicly. Told reporters he didn't expect to live much longer. The threats were too real, the enemies too determined. But Bumpy saved what Malcolm cared about more than his own life. The mosques, the community centers, the places where Malcolm's message could continue after he was gone. And those places stood for 11 months while Malcolm was alive, and for decades after he died, because a street kingpin made a decision that cost him money and relationships and business advantages. Why? Because Harlem mattered more than profit. Because some things are worth protecting, even when it's bad for business. Because power without principle is just violence. And Bumpy Johnson understood the difference. March 12, 1964. A revolutionary called a gangster at 2 a.m. asking for help, and the gangster said yes. Not because they were friends, not because they agreed about anything, but because they both loved Harlem enough to put aside everything else. That's the Bumpy Johnson most people don't know. Not the enforcer, not the criminal, but the man who protected faith when faith needed protecting. The man who understood that sometimes the most important thing you control is what you choose not to destroy. If this story showed you a different side of both Malcolm X and Bumpy Johnson, hit that subscribe button. We're telling the stories that don't make it into history books, the moments that prove power and principle don't have to be enemies. Drop a like if you understand that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply protecting what matters. And in the comments, let me know. Would you have made the same call Bumpy made? Would you have risked your business to protect something you didn't personally believe in? Turn on notifications because next up, we're covering what happened when Bumpy Johnson returned from Alcatraz after 11 years and discovered the man he trusted had stolen his entire empire. What Bumpy did in the next 24 hours became the most talked about moment in Harlem history. Remember, in Harlem, protection wasn't just about power. It was about knowing what deserved to be protected. And Bumpy Johnson protected what mattered every single time.